Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'm talking about the usage of tarot in White Lotus Season 2. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/everydaytarot. I just added some new benefits, so if you join at the lovers level, you get the ability to ask tarot-related questions, and I'll answer them on the podcast, and you'll be individually thanked by name on the podcast when you join that tier. If you join the Witch Bitch level, you get monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners, as well as the opportunity to get an individual tarot reading live on the podcast. The link is in the show notes if you want to check out the Patreon. You can always check out my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards I pull. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, I'd love to see you at one of my Let's Talk Tarot meetup group events where we all bring some of our favorite decks and play around with tarot and oracle decks together. Our next meetup will be on March 10th at 5 p.m. at Township 20 in Sumner. Use the meetup link to check out details on the upcoming event. All right, so we're in Season 4 of the podcast. If you didn't already know, in the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In Season 2 and 3, I went through all the major arcana cards and the 4 suits, one per episode, and this season I'm talking all about tarot and pop culture. And today, as I said at the top of the episode, I'm talking about the usage of tarot in the TV show White Lotus, specifically in Season 2. So a little bit of background on White Lotus. It's considered an American black comedy drama anthology. It's created by Mike White for HBO. It premiered in the summer of 2021. And the series follows the exploits of guests and staff during a week spent at a luxury global resort hotel chain. The first season was set in Hawaii and filmed there, the second in Sicily, and the third that's coming out right now is in Thailand. And so today we're going to be focusing on Season 2 and really just one episode and one character that gets a tarot reading in this episode. So our character is Tanya McCoy, played by Jennifer Coolidge. She's a wealthy, unstable woman recovering from the death of her mother. We see her in Season 1 actually in Hawaii, and then also she shows up in Season 2. She's traveling alone to the hotel looking for love and in desperate need of a massage. And she meets a massage therapist at the first season who comes back later on as well. So in Season 2, like I said, this one's in Sicily. We focus in on Tanya as she's the one that gets the tarot reading in this episode. And she's playing her same character from the first season. So in the first season, she's there. She's alone and looking for someone, and this season she now is married and has a husband and is very concerned about their relationship. So we sort of start in the beginning of the episode, and the episode is in, again, Season 2. It's the third episode, and it's called Bull Elephants. And I guess if I haven't said this already, there will be spoilers for White Lotus Season 2. I guess I said where Season 3 will be set, but I'm not going to talk about anything that happens in that season since it's just coming out right now. And I won't really talk more about Season 1, but she was in that season as well. Okay, so she's in the beginning of the episode. She runs to the front desk and she asks our manager at the hotel if she needs a tarot reader. And she asked them, do you think they can make a house call? It's kind of an emergency. So a little dramatic at the beginning of the episode. The manager is happy to fulfill her request. I think she says, like in Italian, like, she talks to her employee and says, like, hey, can you get the tarot reader for the crazy woman? So Tanya is already being characterized in the episode as sort of desperate, crazy. So the tarot reader shows up later in the episode. and she sits down with her in her own like hotel room. I mean, it's very nice, like sweet. And she asks the tarot reader, okay, like I want to know if we're gonna make it, if our marriage is gonna last. She's like a newlywed to this guy, and she sort of the whole season like doesn't necessarily know why, but she thinks he's cheating. She's sort of skeptical. She's very concerned about the relationship, but every time that she sort of asks him for reassurance, he kind of just like brushes her off and like tries to convince her, no, it's fine. Like, I think in this episode he even says like, I know like I've had 4 marriages, and she's like, 4? I didn't think it was 4. I thought it was 3. And he's like, you're the 4th one. So there's just a bit of like, she's very concerned. Um, so again, she asks the tarot reader if the marriage is going to last. And basically the tarot reader, so I'll sort of get like the gist of it and then we'll get into the cards that get pulled. But the tarot reader basically tells her immediately like her husband's in love with someone else. There's someone beautiful in his life. Tanya asks like, can that be me? And the tarot reader's like, no, no way, it's not you. And Tanya gets very upset. She throws the negative, she keeps calling her negative, like the tarot reader out. And clearly, like Tanya doesn't really want to like change. I was reading an article sort of describing some of this, and they're like, yeah, Tanya doesn't want to change. She's discarding people the same as always. Because in the first season, she gets a massage from this massage therapist, Belinda. And she sort of promises the whole time that she's going to like fund Belinda, that she's such a good massage therapist. Like, I want you to have your own business and all this stuff. She wants to like, use her money to help this person. And then by the end of the season, she like doesn't follow through on it. And Belinda was really convinced that she was going to help her out. And actually Belinda's in this coming season right now. So we get to see her again. But there is this sort of like, she just kind of like uses people in the moment and then gets very upset when they won't like do exactly what she wants. She also, like with her husband, she tries to get like a prenup, as trying to like to get some security with him. And because she is the one that's wealthy, and that's sort of made clear in the first season. And I don't know if she's concerned that he's using her for her money. I don't think that's exactly what's going on, but she sort of like often uses her money to like buy her way out of problems. Which even sort of happens here with the tarot reader, right? She's sort of like concerned about the relationship, and instead of talking to him about it, I mean, she tries that, but she just kind of doesn't really believe him, or sort of like dealing with the insecurity around it, perhaps going to therapy, trying stuff like that. She's like, no, I'm going to get a tarot reader. Tell me the things I want to hear. Okay, so we'll get into now. Let's get into the cards that were depicted. So again, the tarot reader says the cards say your husband is in love with someone else. And then we get sort of like the tarot spread, and we sort of just very briefly see it. And again, like it is a spread. And she doesn't even really tell Tanya what the cards are. She's sort of like interpreting out loud. And basically, immediately, the tarot reader, as she starts talking, Tanya is annoyed and frustrated. And I think she even says, I pulled it out, a quote down here. It says, no, it's not supposed to be like this. You're supposed to build me up. Take your crappy things and your horrible cards and your shitty little ashtray and get out. And the tarot reader is like burning Palo Santo, I think. So, and like Tanya doesn't even really maybe appreciate what's going on, or sort of like the spiritual aspects of the tarot in this episode. And she really just wants it to sort of like, I guess, like reassure her. And it's not really like confirm her fears. I would say they do confirm her fears. And then she's very upset about that. Okay, so the cards that get pulled, and they are in like a spread format. I'm going to have a picture of the spread up on my website that I was able to find. And we see, so she pulls the devil card as the first one that comes up, which generally the devil is about sort of like that infatuation, temptation. It's very interesting. Again, this is like the 3rd episode I'm doing in the pop culture series, or 4th. And we see a lot of the same cards that come up when tarot gets used in pop culture. It's sort of like a lot of the very, I don't know, like strong cards in the major arcana, the devil, In this one, we then get the moon, the fool reversed. Then we get the star and the chariot. So a lot of the kind of, we often see the devil, we often see the fool. Sometimes the chariot comes up. I would say other ones are sort of death. That one doesn't come up in this one. But I would say that the tone of the reading, there is like a death undertone. So again, the first card pulled is the devil, and I'm going to get into what the tarot reader says. It is sort of all in Italian. So in the episode, you don't necessarily really understand what the tarot reader is saying. We get like a brief glimpse of the cards. We just sort of get that Tanya is annoyed with the outcome of the cards. She doesn't really want to hear it, even though she requested this. And then she just kind of like very quickly makes the tarot reader like get out of the room. And the tarot reader gets very like concerned and frantic. She sort of lays out all the cards and starts to tell Tanya about them. Tanya gets annoyed. She starts kind of trying to get her to wrap up. And then the tarot reader almost like goes into like a trance or like gets very concerned. And she starts like talking about like, oh, okay, the devil is this and the fool is this and the star and the chariot. And like, this is what's going to happen. So I'm going to talk about the cards a little bit and then we'll kind of get into like what the tarot reader says. And someone on Reddit was able to translate the Italian that we hear. So I'm going to sort of talk about the Italian that was translated that we learn about and sort of how that relates to the cards. And then basically what happens later in the season. Because spoilers, like this tarot reading basically kind of predicts what happens at the end of the season. And if only Tanya had listened, she might have known that. But instead, it's sort of like she just brushes it out of the way. So again, we have the devil, sort of like that temptation, sometimes like enslavement. Again, there's often like people depicted like chained to the devil. Sometimes comes up in like toxic relationships or power imbalances, which is interesting because I would say that like Tanya's relationship is a bit of a power imbalance. She sort of thinks that it's in one direction, that like she's the one with the power, she's the one that has the money, he's marrying her. And then she sort of starts to build this insecurity that he doesn't really love her, he's using her for the money, or that kind of thing. But we sort of find out later that the power imbalance, some of that is true, that like he is potentially using her for the money and things like that. So yeah, this will have spoilers for the end of season 2 because again, this tarot reading really kind of predicts what's going to happen in the episode. So after the devil, we get the moon, and the moon in tarot is often about like the subconscious, the sort of shadowy side, sometimes like duplicity or sort of like the ambiguity, so like the wateriness that's associated with the moon. I'm trying to think because the moon card is interesting. It's not necessarily like how I personally feel about the moon in real life, but the moon in tarot is sort of like the foil to the sun card, and the sun is basically all about like, oh yeah, good things are happening, and like it's one of the most positive, like consider one of the most positive cards in the deck. And the moon is kind of, again, like its foil that like, okay, like you can't really believe everything that's said, or there's this falsehood, which again, in this reading, I think is really about like Tanya's husband, or that there's like some falsehoods going on in the relationship that she is sort of picking up on, but then like is concerned about and doesn't quite know like what that would mean. Like she jumps to cheating. Like that's always what she's concerned about, but it's sort of like a lot of layers on top of that, of what actually happens. Then the next card that's pulled is the Fool reversed. So the Fool, again, upright is about like beginning of a journey, like so excited, you're about to blissfully step off that cliff, not knowing what's going to happen, but sort of in this like optimistic way. So the Fool reversed would be more about like idealism, or that you're being reckless maybe, or like you're jumping in too quickly. Again, right, the downside of blissfully stepping off a cliff is that you have no idea what's underneath the rocks or underneath your situation as you step off. So while it can be this sort of like, this like cautious, or not even cautious, this like optimism reversed, it's a little bit more of like naivete, perhaps, and kind of not understanding how like your behavior affects the situation. So then we get, and I guess like with the Fool, I think a lot about, again, like Tanya's journey, that sort of like she's very excited to be in this relationship. She's finally kind of like not alone. She really wants everything, but she's pretty insecure about it. And so she's asking for reassurance all the time. And again, she can sort of like seemingly intuitively pick up that like something's not right, but she just can't quite figure out like what it is for now. Again, it sort of plays out as the season goes on, because this is only the third episode. So then what gets pulled is the star, and these are in the spread, like the top and the bottom cards. So the stars up there, which the star is generally about like hopes and wishes and dreams, right? Like wish upon a star. It can also be kind of that like follow your North Star, that like here's the vision, here's what I want in life. So there is sort of that, which is kind of like, I feel like that's sort of about kind of like, oh, this is what I hope for the marriage. Like, this is what I really want in this relationship. That maybe there's this possibility of like, okay, like maybe something great's going to happen. Like maybe, like it's generally seen as a positive card. And then the last card pulled is the Chariot. And the Chariot is often, again, like depicted as like a person being pulled by a horse-drawn chariot. It's very like determination, willpower, strength, things happening really fast, but also like overcoming obstacles. And again, it's a card of a lot of movement. Like, again, if you think about like a horse-drawn chariot, a horse-drawn carriage, like you're kind of like along for the ride. Like you can steer the horse, like you can hope, you can things, but like if something spooks the horse, or it can kind of like, it's a little bit of like you're forcing it to happen, but also can maybe get out of control quickly. So it's also a card of like travel, because again, there's like a lot of movement indicated in the card. Like it's not just about, right, like a stationary carriage or a chariot. It's about like the horse-drawn aspect of it. One of my decks, the Sasser Bito Tarot deck by Stacia Burrington, depicts it as like a horse that has this sort of like wild expression on their face as they're like almost like what would happen when a horse like bucks or something, that they're like, all right, like you're ready to go. And so there's also this, I feel like the Chariot in this reading is maybe about Tanya's husband, like that he has this like willpower, he's trying to make things happen fast. There is travel, and there is travel that happens in this season. She ends up like leaving the original place that she was with her husband, and they go off to this other palazzo, like another palace place with like friends of his. And that's kind of like where things start to devolve and come to a head, and kind of like the reading, I would say, starts to like come true of some of these things. And then, right, like these are all also only major arcana cards. So generally in the spread, if you pull only major arcana cards, that's seen as like, okay, like this is big stuff, like something significant's going to happen, events, like change, something like that. All right, so let's get into kind of like what the tarot reader says, from what I can tell from this one person on Reddit. So, take that with a grain of salt. But it's there's a lot of, it's in Italian, so we don't really see it. The subtitles don't actually like say what it says. So this is generally from people like having watched the episode, or maybe like watching it in Italian and then like seeing the words. And so what kind of happens is like one of the first things she says, the tarot reader, is like madness will drive you to suicide. And I would say that's like an interpretation of what happens at the end of the season. Again, spoilers. We hear her say, "This is the truth." We hear her in sort of like a rushed tone then start to say like, it's dangerous. The crazy man has escaped or like come out. Please, I beg you, let me help you. Or maybe she was asking for help. It's sort of unclear. And then someone interpreted this as maybe what she says, the crazy man, she's referring to the Fool tarot card. So maybe, again, that Fool reversed is about Tanya's husband or about someone else. And then she sort of starts rambling, the tarot reader, and she's like touching the cards and like trying to like, she's sort of like making all the connections live as it's happening. And she's sort of in this like, I would say like trance state. It's sort of like hectic and it's happening really fast. And so it's very hard to like figure out exactly what she was saying, but we sort of get like snippets. She says like his thighs, this is the beautiful one, this is the devil. And then she again says like the stars, the thighs. And I'm trying to remember if the thighs play into this at all. But basically what happens in the end of the season is that Tanya goes off to this palazzo with her husband and all these other guys. She sort of starts to see that like her husband is cheating on her and is like possibly in love with another man, and that she kind of figures out like that part, and then she starts to sort of realize that like all these people are kind of like in on it, of that it's not just like one, that her husband is like trying to steal her money or anything or like kill her for that. It's this like very elaborate plot, that like he's in love with someone else and those people like created this plan to kill Tanya to get her money, and it's like this long con basically. And she sort of like walks in on some situations when they're at the palazzo that start to reveal this. And then like, yeah, she also gets with another man that's there, and it's very complicated, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But basically, in the end, Tanya ends up on a yacht with like all these people, and she sort of figured out that like something nefarious is going on, but she's not quite sure how to safely like get out of it. She has her assistant Portia with her for a lot of it, and is always like calling on Portia to help her out in these situations. And Portia never really quite like totally like can help her and knows what's going on. She's very like, again, just as like she is with the tarot reader, she's very like up and down about Portia and like, oh, please help me, and then like, oh, get out of here. Like even when the tarot reader is there, she goes to like, she makes Portia come back from like some other part of Sicily just so that she can like be with her while she gets the tarot reading. And then the tarot reader starts to ask like, well, what do you want to know? And Tanya immediately is like, Portia, get out, because she wants to talk about her husband and like her concern about him cheating. And so Portia's like, oh, alrighty, like why did I even need to be here? And so what ends up happening is Tanya, again, she's on this yacht, she's like obsessed with the idea that her husband is cheating on her, and she like thinks that all these people are in on it, and she gets a gun at some point, and then she basically like on this yacht gets so freaked out that she like kills everyone on the yacht, just out of like, okay, I think they're all in on it, I'm just gonna like save myself. And she's very like, I don't like to use the word hysterical, but she's like sobbing and trying to like get the gun, and she just sort of like shoots everyone that comes down to try to like interact with her. And then that kind of happens. There's like some people on the yacht that were like cooking, or like not necessarily like the people that she was concerned about. And she sort of freaks out because she sees that, oh, some people are still alive and like now they're going to know what happened. And then she tries to like get off the yacht into like the dinghy or like the small boat that you would use to like get to and from the yacht. And as she like steps over the side of the yacht, she falls off. She like slips, falls off, hits her head, and then like drowns in the water. And that's how the season ends, basically. So I wouldn't say, right, like, so we heard earlier that the tarot reader says like this thing of madness will drive you to suicide. And it's almost this idea that like, because she was so obsessed with the idea that her husband was trying to take her money or was cheating or was like all of this stuff, that it almost like ends up playing out that because she's obsessed with this idea, and seemingly it was what was happening, that like people were in on it, and this was this like long con, but she like kills everyone, and then sort of in like a weird happenstance, like ends up killing herself on accident. So it's not necessarily that she was trying to kill herself in the end, but madness will drive you to suicide, like, is kind of what happens in the end of the episode. And the way that White Lotus, the series, always starts out is that in the first episode of each season, you see a dead body and you don't know who it is. So you do know that like at the end of the season, someone's going to die, but you never know who it's going to be until it kind of reveal it at the end. And so that is what happened. So again, the cards that we got were the Devil, the Moon, the Fool reversed, and then the Star and the Chariot. And it does seem like, just like in a lot of, I would say, pop culture usages of tarot, the tarot is sort of used here as a way to sort of give an omen of what's going to happen in the season. And sort of, if maybe you can kind of like identify the cards, maybe see a bit of like, yeah, what's going to happen in the future in the episode. And it does seem like the tarot reader at the time is very concerned for Tanya. She wants to tell her what's going on and trying to tell her like, okay, this guy is the devil, and like, right, he's sort of trying to like seemingly like con you and all this stuff, but she is so reluctant to hear kind of the truth. She really just wants to hear what she wants, even though she's asking the questions. And I guess this is a thing that like happens to tarot readers in real life often, is that people come to tarot readers for relationship advice or decision-making things, and instead of, or what people can sometimes tend to do is they go there to sort of get confirmation of the thing that they already want to do or that they already believe. And then if that doesn't happen, people get upset. And that basically is what happens in this episode, is that basically Tanya's like, okay, I'm going to go to this tarot reader and she's going to confirm that everything's fine and then I can just like let it go. But that's not what happens. And so then she really throws the tarot reader out and is very annoyed that like the tarot reader is giving her things that might be real that's going on, but not the good news that she wanted. And yeah, so I guess we're in the sort of like meanings, lessons learned part of the episode. I do like that the tarot reader says, like, Tanya sort of at the beginning is kind of like, well, how does this work? Even though I assume if she's like emergency calling a tarot reader that she's done this before. But the tarot reader says you ask a question and then the cards will answer. So there is this sort of like idea that, right, it's not necessarily the tarot reader that can see the future, but it's the tarot reader's relationship with the cards and that sort of like connection that the cards will tell you kind of the answers. And we do get sort of this seemingly like in this episode, the idea that like the tarot is telling the future. And we kind of don't really know if there's anything that when I talked about in the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina episode, in that one, the tarot reader is very clear that like, this is what's going to happen unless you like pick a different path. And so there is this idea that like, it is not that the future is set in stone, it's that you can change it. But right now, like the road you're going down is leading to this potential sort of, in this case, catastrophe, or sort of like madness, or this like sort of obsession with the idea that her husband's cheating on her. And so it's not quite clear in this one if we think that the tarot reader could have maybe changed things, but she does say, like seemingly, if this is, you know, accurately translating the Italian that we hear, that like, let me help you. And she's sort of trying to really like frantically give her the information so Tanya can maybe make different choices. But unfortunately, Tanya turns that down. And because it's quote unquote negative, she says the word negative a lot in that scene, she doesn't really get to hear any of the things that might happen or the advice. And then it sort of does play out as the cards say it will, which is very interesting. All right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today on this theme. Okay, interesting. So, as I was pulling the cards, I was thinking about the question of what can we do to change our circumstances. Again, sort of in the vein of this episode. And I pulled from the Sacerdotito Tarot deck because I talked about it earlier. And I pulled Judgment Reversed. So in the Tarot deck guidebook for Judgment, I'll talk about it upright. So generally it's about taking responsibility for your actions. It's about rebirth, new beginnings. The image on this particular card shows a person sort of like cocooned in blankets. And the artist talks about like the woman is sort of like emerging like an insect out of a cocoon. She's the master and judge of her own transformation. So reversed, this is more about taking on burdens, being haunted by and clinging to the past. And that is very interesting because that is what Tanya does in this episode of White Lotus. Instead of sort of maybe allowing the tarot reading to change the course of her life or make different decisions, maybe get out of the relationship sooner or sort of trust her intuition and what's actually happening, she just sort of blindly ignores it, or not even blindly, she intentionally ignores the advice, and instead, right, sort of ends up being haunted and clinging to the past, which is that she was alone. And so she's so fearful, perhaps, about being alone that she's willing to stay in this relationship, even though she knows that something is not right about it. And I will be very interested to see because, spoilers for season 3 of White Lotus, the husband that Tanya was with is back in the season, and now he's with someone else. So I'll be very curious to see what that character ends up doing, and if we see a sort of similar conning or kind of what's going on there. All right, so that was that one, and I actually felt like I needed to pull another card. So I grabbed my Goddess of Love tarot deck, since this episode with Tanya is also all about like relationships and her sort of fears about her husband and the love of her life, and sort of that kind of thing. So I sort of was thinking about the question more of what can we learn about trusting ourselves and our intuition, right? Because again, like that is what we see Tanya not necessarily doing. Like she does have this intuition that something is wrong. She's just not quite sure what to do with that information. And what she wants to do is just get sort of the confirmation that it's not wrong or that her intuition is wrong and that everything is fine, because that would maybe be easier. But instead, what happens is that, right, that she sort of doesn't trust that intuition, or she just really only wants to hear good information. So interestingly, also, I pulled the Wheel of Fortune upright. So I'm going to read a little bit of what's in the Tarot deck guidebook and then try to interpret like how this can be about trusting ourselves and our intuition. And it says, the Wheel of Fortune is an omen of divine transformation. The Jovian power of this card is a blessing from the universe that comes in moments of alignment, when the inner and outer realms hang in harmony. When the Wheel of Fortune appears, it can be a time of cosmic surrender when you recognize the work you've done to be where you are. The corresponding deity is the ancient Celtic goddess Sheila na gig, who is seen spreading her vulva in stone reliefs around Ireland, Britain, and other parts of Europe. She reflects the fecundity of the Wheel of Fortune, the never-ending journey of death and rebirth. Energy neither created nor destroyed births something, whether a magical child or a real child, through pleasure and presence. Remember that although you are not in control or you are not as in control as you may think, you are more supported than you realize. The Wheel of Fortune is the goddess's ability to lead you back to the path of wholeness. Whatever you're moving through has something to teach you. Trust. All right. And so the affirmation along with this card is I am divinely guided by the power of love and lust. And the journal question is where do I feel guided by love and by the goddess, and how can I align myself with this force? So yeah, hopefully you can take that to heart. I wish Tanya had taken this to heart, that she would have been able to sort of trust that, right, she was at this sort of like turning point, and that things could have gone differently for her if she had kind of been able to make those decisions or trusted herself or had kind of the ability to, without knowing why, to just, again, trust her intuition and try to get out of that relationship or just away from it. Because we sort of see that it doesn't end well for her. And that's very sad. Yeah, all right. So think about, again, trusting ourselves and our intuition, that maybe you're at this turning point where, right, that we're in a point of transformation. Just because things have gone a certain way in the past doesn't mean they're going to go that way in the future, or that we haven't learned from different things. All right. So links for the tarot decks I talk about will be in the show notes and on my website. And the last one was from the Goddess of Love tarot deck. Can't remember if I said that. And yeah, if you want to purchase them or look at them, they're in the show notes. And thanks again for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.